Hello, I'm Margaret Ryan at the UN Climate Talks in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm speaking with Michael Zammit Cutajar. He's chairman of the Long-Term Cooperative Action Group, one of the two major groups negotiating the treaty here in Copenhagen. Mr. Zammit Cutajar, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Margaret.
Tell us, what kind of progress has your group been making? You're broken down into smaller working groups right now, correct?
We just had one opener and then we've broken down into lots of little groups preparing text, a number of texts on different topics. And today I will be tabling a more general text, the core text, which could be the main outcome of the conference in my area. I should say that we are not negotiating a treaty necessarily. We are negotiating decisions, a package of decisions which will contain the substance of what Copenhagen comes out with under the convention. On the side of that, there's another negotiation on the Kyoto Protocol.
Right. Well, in your area, what are the key areas that you are trying to produce text on?
There are some areas where there's a very good chance of agreement on specific elements of the action plan, if you like. There's technology, there's adaptation, RED, capacity building, maybe a couple of other things in the mitigation area, work on agriculture, for example. The big issues that are the most difficult to move on are mitigation. Who does what to reduce and limit emissions? Developing, in what terms do you frame that? And secondly, finance, not only the scale of finance to support action by developing countries, but also the way it is sourced, where it comes from, and the way it is governed.
On that finance issue, we've heard a lot of talk about fast start financing. The EU proposal, I think the US has endorsed the idea of $10 billion a year for the next 3 years. Is there progress on that separate from the long-term issue?
That's not the focus of our work, although it may come in at the end. That's likely to be more dealt with at the political level. The issue is 10 billion a year up to 12, that is 30 billion, or is it a sum building up to 10 billion in 2012? So there's even negotiation about that. We are concentrating much more on the long term, what happens after 2012, after 2020, what is the new way of cooperating financially, where can we find money in addition to public funding, and as I say, how is the governance to be organized, in whose hands is it, who has the weight in the decision making.
What are some of the options for that governance? We already have institutions like the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility. What are some of the options under consideration?
Existing institutions will be used. The issue is how the Conference of the Parties, how the parties to the treaty, the convention, intervene in the financial management, if you like. There are various proposals on the table. There's the idea of some sort of high-level overview to make sure that the whole financial picture is visible, that we can track where the money is going. That's one of the most difficult things to do. Who is putting up the money? Is it new money? That's always an issue. And then there is also the question of the possibility of a more executive role for the Conference of the Parties, getting closer to the decision making. But I do not see that the conference itself will become a bank, no.
Okay. On the RED issue, that's the forest, sustainable forestry, there's been quite a bit of controversy here among the various NGOs saying that some of the RED provisions would actually allow forest clearing for plantations. Has that been handled in the negotiations?
That is being handled now. There's a lot of very emotional issues in RED. There's the question, well, emotional, social, political issues. The question of the rights of people who live in and around the forests, whether they are indigenous or not. After all, many people live in forests. Millions of people live in forests. They're not just the virgin. There's the question of when or whether it is legitimate for a country to deforest because it hasn't started doing so yet. It needs the space in which to develop. So you can't block that happening in, let's say, the Congo Basin, but you can stop it happening where there's already been a lot of deforestation. So we have to find a way of dealing with different circumstances, which is fair, which also protects the environment.
Writing that for all the different cultures and societies around the world must be a challenge.
It is always a challenge to listen to different voices. It's one of the pleasures of working in this sort of area. The actual technical work on the drafting, I'm not doing that, but I'm just keeping all the different groups going in the right direction.
And technology transfer. You said there's been progress made on that. I know intellectual property rights was one of the issues there. Well, how far has that come?
That hasn't been resolved. It's always a tricky one. Positions are very different. Sometimes people even decide, as in the case of a recent conference in Delhi, not to mention it at all, intellectual property. Technology it's more than transfer. It's cooperative development, it's deployment, and it's transfer. And it's the transfer bit that is always the trickiest, because that's where the IPR, where the property rights come up.
Okay, and adaptation. Is your group looking at the adaptation issues as well?
Very much so. One of the liberties I took with the plan that was adopted in Bali, which put mitigation first and then adaptation, I said let's put adaptation first, because it's the issue that affects all countries. And it's, I think, the most uniting issue. Certainly there's a lot of progress, a lot of willingness to move ahead there. The issue does come down to money. How is support given to developing countries to do their planning for adaptation and actually to start adapting?
Okay. Where do you go from here? What's ahead for your group?
Well, my group is supposed to end in 2009, so I'm within days of the end of my mandate, and while I'm very, very heavily involved now, I'm so happy to know that it's going to end soon.
Okay. Michael Zammit Cutajar, thanks so much for joining us today. In Copenhagen, Denmark, I'm Margaret Ryan, Clean Skies News.